Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the Sydney Summit so far. I'm a solutions architect, and when I meet with my customers, I like to say something all the time. Friends, don't let friends have the data unencrypted. Why is that? Well, because encryption is the most powerful control to store and process your sensitive data. If you look at what we do every day, you and I share an increasing amount of information with our other business partners and colleagues and everything. So today, I'm going to show you how easy it is to use encryption services in order to truly secure your data in the cloud. So at AWS, security is our top priority. But we also believe in great customer experience. And so we've designed two services that will help you secure your data. The first service is AWS Key Management Service, and the second is AWS Certificate Manager. So about the first service, typically customers have information, they have data, that they need to store securely. AWS KMS provides ways to secure the data encryption key so you can save your data in a completely encrypted form. For the second service, AWS Certificate Manager, typically you have users, you have customers, business partners, third-party providers. They need to access your data in your AWS environment. Typically, ACM enables you to securely deploy trusted SSL certificates at the border of your AWS network. In addition to this, we've integrated ACM with KMS, and we'll discuss that aspect a bit later on. So I trust that you're all here to learn about the benefits of these two services. And really, don't worry, that's nowhere near difficult as a French cooking class. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to use a multi-tier workload on AWS. And typically what we see from customers is they store the data on S3 as part of the static content. What you see in terms of data, you see video recordings, audio files, PDF documents, images, and S3 is the perfect service to store all that content. The second service that we see customers using a lot to store their content is Amazon Elastic Block Store, or EBS for short. They store information using EC2 instances and as well RDS databases. So storing information is only one part of your data. What happens is you also have your data in transit, so going from your customers to your AWS environment and then back. So this is very much a high-level workload following a multi-tier design pattern on AWS. But as a solutions architect, I know for a fact that this design pattern is used by many, many of our AWS customers. These are the following services that we're going to focus on today. And we're going to add some additional security layers inside these services. So first thing first, protecting your content in Amazon S3. How easy it is? Well, let's have a look there. First thing, that's your Amazon S3 bucket. We want to encrypt our data at rest. What we do is, using the AWS Management Console, we edit the properties of our S3 bucket, we go on the default encryption. We select AWS KMS and select our encryption key that we want to use for all encryption and decryption operations. You save, and from now on, what happens is every single content that you're going to upload or download is going to be encrypted at rest. The second step in that example, we want to give permissions to our EC2 instances to upload and download content with the encryption enabled. That's typically done by giving explicit privileges to an EC2 instance role to actually consume the KMS key. And that is done directly from the KMS management console. So we can see here on the diagram that the S3 bucket has the KMS icon to show that default encryption is turned on. Now, if your EC2 instances start to upload content, like the following command line, what should we expect as an output from the CLI? Well, the usual, the command succeeds, but if we look at the properties of that S3 object, we can see that the content is encrypted at rest. So use KMS, and you will never have a world-readable object. So computers, we know we use computers every day. They're really reliable, and we know what to expect. But humans, unfortunately, we are less reliable. So what if someone decides to change the policy of one of your S3 buckets and actually decides to grant public read or public write to your S3 objects? That's something that you don't want, because the data that you store in Amazon S3, that's your business data. You don't want that to go publicly and being accessible to anyone. So if we look for each operation, if someone tries to download one of the files that you've stored in your protected S3 bucket, they're going to have an access denied. If they try to upload some arbitrary content, again, they're going to have an access denied. Now you might ask, well, why this is happening that way? The reason is AWS KMS requires explicit permissions on your keys, otherwise everything is going to fail. So really strong control mechanisms. So really, use KMS and you will never have a world-readable object. When I meet with customers, the second place where we see a lot of data being stored is EC2 instances and EBS volumes. So before I go in the details of the EBS service, I think it's worth making sure that everyone has the same understanding and understand how EC2 instances and EBS volumes work together. So the first thing that you need is a compute layer. And that comes with an EC2 instance, where you have some memory and you have some CPU allocated to you. And then you need a storage layer. So think very much like your SSD drive or your hard drive in your laptop today. And that comes with an EBS volume. So in the past, when you wanted to encrypt the storage layer, you would have to do what's called full disk encryption. And you actually had two ways to do it. The first one, you would store your data encryption keys in plain text, but really that's not something that you want to do. Okay, definitely not best practices. Or you could decide to protect your data encryption keys with a passphrase, but each time you had to access the data, you would have to manually enter the passphrase in order to access the data. That, of course, that's not scalable. in the era of cloud, but that's not secure either, because someone has to have the knowledge of that passphrase, and that's sensitive information. So in the past, really, really difficult to do full disk encryption. How is it like when you use AWS services? Well, typically, when you create a new EBS volume, there's two information that you need to provide. The first one, you select encrypt this volume. So you state the fact that you want your volume encrypted. And very much like the S3 service, you select the KMS key that you want to use to encrypt your data. You click Create Volume, and the whole content is encrypted. There's nothing else to do. So that's quite amazing. So what data is encrypted? Well, the storage layer, your EBS volume, and the content is encrypted. But what customers don't know is the data moving between the EBS service and the EC2 instance is also encrypted. And in fact, it's only the underlying server that's performing the encryption and decryption operations. So EBS volumes, very much like your hard drive, but it comes packed with many, many other features. And one of them that I really appreciate is what we call EBS snapshots. An EBS snapshot is very much a point-in-time image of the content of your EBS volume. So what happens if I take a snapshot of a fully encrypted EBS volume? Well, the resulting snapshot is completely encrypted as well. But what's worth noting here is the data transiting from your EBS volume to the snapshot is also encrypted. And if I take that snapshot, that point-in-time image, and then I restore it into an EBS volume, the resulting EBS volume is also encrypted, and the data being copied over into your new EBS volume is all encrypted as well. There's actually a bit more than just that. Use KMS and never risk exposing your backups to the world. Again, we know humans sometimes make mistakes. So what if someone decides to change the permissions of one of your EBS snapshots and grant public read to everyone? Again, you have potentially sensitive information, at least something that belongs to your business. You don't want that to happen. So with an EBS, a KMS encrypted snapshot, let's see what that would mean. Two possible operations here. The first one, you can copy your snapshot into a new snapshot. And the second operation is restore your snapshot into a new EBS volume. So first one, copy a snapshot. Anyone trying to do that outside of their permission will get an access denied despite the public read. If they try to restore that encrypted snapshot into a new EBS volume, they get an access denied as well. Very much like the S3 case just before, the reason is very simple. KMS requires explicit permissions to perform encryption and decryption. So we've done a bit of work here. Let's step back for a second. KMS, that's the service that keeps on giving. And there's actually a bit more features that are worth discussing here. You remember how EC2 instances and EBS volumes work together, but there's more to it. RDS instances, so our relational database service, also uses EBS volumes for the underlying storage. So you get the same security benefits when you encrypt your data at rest on RDS when you use KMS. Furthermore, for the EBS snapshots, you have the ability to enforce where your data is copied to and with whom you shared it with. So how does it look like with our AWS workload? What kind of boxes can we tick so far? Well, quite a few. We know that S3 bucket has encryption at rest. Same for EBS snapshots, EC2 instances and RDS databases provided by the underlying storage, which is EBS volumes. That's good. 4 services checked out of 6. Now you have data coming in and out of your platform. And what we see customers doing, and you're probably very familiar with that, with information like payment details, login, passwords. That typically, you store that with encryption at rest, but you need to apply the same security mechanisms when the data is in transit. So we're going to focus our attention on the following 2 services. Why do you want encryption in transit? There's actually few reasons for that. The first one is the integrity of your communication. I mean, it makes sense. You don't want someone to change one information for another. You don't want someone to alter your communications. Equally important, you don't want anyone to listen to your communication. You don't want someone to know your big boss login and password, for example. And that's quite natural for any business to protect such information. In addition to this, you want to create some form of trust for your users. So when they access your platform, they have a good trust that they're accessing everything in a very secure way. So our Vice President and CTO, Dr. Werner Vogels, likes to say something that I believe is really true. Dance like no one is watching, encrypt like everyone is. How easy it is to issue a trusted SSL certificate when you use Amazon AWS Certificate Manager? Again, very simple. You provide a DNS name, you select a validation method. In that example, that's DNS, but you have the option of using emails. You confirm the request, and usually within a few minutes, you have a valid SSL certificate that's been provisioned in your account. In the past, well, that was actually really difficult to deploy that SSL certificate. I mean, who hasn't in this room today never configured a web server and having to handle the SSL private keys, making sure that everything was correctly set up? We know it takes time, and having to manage the private keys is actually quite sensitive. So in the following example, I use Amazon CloudFront. And if you've never heard about CloudFront, that's our cloud content delivery network. You can edit the properties of your CloudFront distribution. You select custom SSL certificate, and you have a drop-down from which you can select your ACM certificate. You click Save on the settings, and within a few minutes, the SSL certificate is deployed across the whole CloudFront network without any need for you to handle any sensitive material. So as I said, I meet with many customers, and I know some of you are in the room today. And one of the common issues that I see for new customers is what happens when someone forgets to renew SSL certificates. Every single time that happens, that's always a big problem for customers, because that's a downtime. Communications can't flow in or out. Your users can't log in and can't do their usual work. What that would be like on Amazon? Well, it's actually really interesting because we don't have that problem when you issue your certificates with ACM. We take care of the certificate renewal on your behalf, but we also take care of the deployment for you. So it's one-time setup, and then everything keeps going. You keep your business as usual, and we take care of the rest. So AWS Certificate Manager has some really cool features. It's integrated with Amazon CloudFront, Elastic Load Balancing, and API Gateway. If you've never heard about API Gateway, that's an API service that's being managed by AWS, and that plugs into AWS Lambda functions and your EC2 instances. But there's more features that customers aren't necessarily aware. ACM is actually integrated with two other services that we have. The first one is AWS Elastic Beanstalk, and the second is AWS CloudFormation. These two services are here to help you automate the deployment of your stack on AWS, and because it's integrated with ACM, you can automate the provisioning of your SSL certificate as well as the deployment of them. As I said at the very beginning, security is our top priority. And when you think ACM, it handles very sensitive information in the form of the private keys of your SSL certificates. And we want to make sure that it's handled properly. So what we do is, with the private keys, we encrypt that with a data encryption key. What we do with that data key? Well, we secure it with no other service than with AWS Key Management Service. So again, we make sure that we don't break the virtuous circle of encryption. So one last step back on our multi-tier workload on AWS. 4 services ticked, and we can check as well the last 2 services. Now you might think, oh wow, this is great. We're almost 5-6 minutes before everyone else. It's all over. We can beat the queue for the tea and the coffee break. Actually, not just yet. Well, how do you track action performed against your data? Same with your data encryption keys. But more importantly, how do you prove to your organization that all the security goodness you've enabled in your AWS environment is actually working? So by now, we understand that KMS is definitely a cornerstone of security and encryption on AWS. It receives services and customer API requests, but what's worth noting here is it sends logs to CloudTrail, and it's regardless whether the action succeeded or not. CloudTrail collects the logs from KMS and other AWS services, and has the ability to ship these logs to one of your S3 buckets. So some interesting features about CloudTrail. It records API logs for your account and per region, but it has the ability to detect any missing or altered logs. So if you have an audit or if any incident has happened, you know if something is either missing or has been modified. But there's more features with CloudTrail. API logs is one thing. The service supports filtering rules. It's in JSON format, so that's great because it's very easy to read and parse. But for me, one of the really great features is it's integrated with Amazon Athena. If you don't know about Athena, that's our serverless database engine where you can do SQL queries against your static data, and including CloudTrail logs. and you get the results just like a normal SQL query. Last, if you're really keen on processing CloudTrail logs yourself and put that within your own monitoring systems and applications, we provide a CloudTrail processing library for the Java language. So you might ask me, well, how difficult is it to actually understand the CloudTrail logs? Well, it's incredibly easy as long as you follow the rule of 6W. What happened? When did it happen? Which action and service? Where to? Who did it? And where from? So let's have a look at a CloudTrail log in a JSON format. Looks a bit complicated at first, but let's follow the 6W. The first one is what happened? Well, we got an access denied here. Second, when did it happen? Sometimes in March, when typically I was preparing that presentation for you. Which service and which action? Well, in that situation here, the KMS is the service and the operation was decrypt. If you would come to see that in your own organization, that should typically raise a yellow flag, prompting you to do an investigation to understand why the access was denied on one of your KMS key. But let's continue. Where to? That was the Sydney region. And where from? It's marked as AWS internal, meaning that another service requested the decryption operation on your behalf. The last W that's now missing is who. And in that example, that's the instance role, that's an EC2 instance role that I use at the beginning of this presentation. So it's actually really easy to read and to understand CloudTrail logs, and it's really powerful in terms of giving you visibility. So what did we learn today? What used to be really hard in the past in terms of encryption and managing all the data related to encryption has now become incredibly easy, and encryption is truly for everyone. It's integrated with a broad range of services. And in addition to that, you have strong control and visibility of your data. So you might ask me, OK, this is great. We know it's easy. We know it's powerful. How much is this going to cost me? I'm going to use the two services and one example for each to show you that. The first service, AWS Certificate Manager, it's as little as $0 a month. For KMS, it starts as little as $1 a month, and that's one of the examples that will give you that result. So where should you start? Well, first of all, AWS CloudTrail is enabled by default in all newly created accounts. The only thing that you need to do is just configure the destination bucket for the CloudTrail logs. Once you've done that and you're collecting and saving your logs, just enable encryption at rest on the following services. We've seen just a few clicks and it's all working. At AWS, innovation is very much part of what we do. There's not 34, but 35 services that have been integrated with KMS. The last one that we released last week, so 6 days ago, is AWS Secrets Manager that's here to manage credentials for you. So where to get a bit more information? A few references here, but we'll send that to you by email after the presentation if you wish to. Feel free as well to leave some feedback using the app. Thank you very much.